Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So today we're taking a look at some more tech cards that are popping up in the early Justice Hunters format. Now, even though Yummy and Canine are the more popular themes from the set, Dracotails are actually the most flexible and can include a whole bunch of different other themes or tech options alongside them, so they are what's causing a lot of the movement we're seeing. But of course, we should expect a ton of things to change leading up to YCS Vancouver, as players look for different tech options that will help them to win early on in the format, and we also get to see a ton of constant movement all over the market up until then. Let's get started. Kicking things off, we have Dracotail 5 mana. So I think that early on, everyone seems to believe that Dracotails are a weaker deck than Canine or Yummy, and honestly that's probably true based on the results that we've seen, since more of the regional topping deck lists and such that we've seen recently are from Canine and Yummy. However, Dracotail is something that it seems a lot more players are experimenting with, especially since they're a strategy that has a lot more flexibility. They can be combined with other strategies, and you can run a wider range of tech options and hand traps. 5 mana is, I think, the second most broken card in the deck, aside from the fusion monster. This card lets you discard it to conduct a fusion summon during either player's main phase, which is really amazing. This is what allows you to play the game on turn 0 when you are going second, and so we see some players aiming to make cards like Shadal Squamada or Red Eyes Dark Dragoon in the middle of the opponent's turn. Now, when Justice Hunters first came out, the Dracotail cards were among the first to tank in value because they were supposed to be the worst. Everyone would be chasing Izuna and then all of the different Yummy cards, so the Dracotails were supposed to be those extras that people were pulling but didn't really care for as much. However, with the interest that the deck has seen recently, we're seeing some of the cards starting to trend back up. Initially, 5 mana had fallen to about $7, but over the last few days, we've seen it bounce back up to the $12 mark per copy. Honestly, I don't see the card getting much more expensive than this, maybe just like $15 or so, unless we suddenly have a ban list that makes Canine and Yummy much less playable, or some crazy new Dracotail support gets announced. I still expect this theme to be considered worse than the others, so it should be limited in terms of how high its price can go. If you are interested in playing the Dracotail deck, I'd probably wait for another week or two as people crack open their product for this card to cool back off under the $10 mark, then consider grabbing a set. Next, we'll quickly talk about a card we talked about not too long ago. It's Secretaron Dragon. So this is a fusion monster that requires a dragon and spellcaster as material, and it has two very relevant effects. While you control it, your opponent can't activate the effects of special summon dragon or spellcaster monsters, and then you can also target a dragon and spellcaster in your graveyard, special summon one of them, and then return the other to the bottom of your deck. So this card is easily made in Dracotail, and it's also very strong in the Dracotail matchup. So in mirror matches, this is a card that gets made really often. If you're playing something else against Dracotail, this makes Super Poly a really strong disruption as well. However, recently players have also been noting its ability to revive something out of your graveyard is actually a really powerful form of extension, so this is something that has been more in the spotlight recently. With Secretaron Dragon, this was an ultra in the most recent core set called Duelist's Advance, and I think when we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, we noted that it was only around $2 each and was definitely worth grabbing. Well, now we've seen the ultras shoot up in price, and they're now around $7 to $8 per copy. Definitely a really strong card for Dracotail players that should definitely be in your extra deck, and you should also have it if you are wanting to side deck Super Poly as well. As a brand new card that's generally only going to be useful in the one particular matchup, I'm expecting this card's price to stabilize at around $5 to $7 for the next little while. I do want to take a second to remind all of you to check out our website, MSTmerch.com. Now, over at MSTmerch.com, we have everything that you will need to optimize your Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament experience. We have the basics with white, black, pink, and our new purple matted sleeves, which are my personal favorites, as well as smooth and matted sleeves to double sleeve your valuable cards and sleeves with for tournament play. But we also have some other items that you can really use to customize your collection. We have amazing foil sleeves, including some with the MST.TV logo, and dividers and subdividers so that you can keep your collection perfectly organized and easily accessible. Regardless of if you're a competitive or casual player, I'm certain that you'll find something that you will enjoy over at MSTmerch.com. Moving on, we next have Shadal Squamada. So the Shadal strategy is a pretty old one coming out back in Duelist Alliance, and the main deck monsters have pretty similar effects. They do have a flip effect, which is generally not going to be too relevant, and then they have effects that trigger if they're sent to the graveyard by a card effect. Of course, this includes being used as a fusion material, so we've recently seen a bunch of players trying to hype up the Shadal Dracotail strategy. Since Dracotails don't care about what monster you fuse with from your hand, you can just use Shadal monsters and trigger their effects for free value, and since you're using Shadals, this grants you access to El Shadal window. Squamada is interesting because when it's sent to the graveyard, you can send any Shadal monster from your deck to the graveyard as well, which would trigger its effect. There are some good options from the Shadal strategy, such as Dragon to pop back row or Beast to draw a card. Squamada is a card that they're considering playing in multiples, since if you fuse off Squamada, you could just dump whichever utility you want to trigger from your deck depending on the situation. Now, with Squamada, the card actually has been incredibly easy to obtain historically, as it has 3 different common printings. However, its one holo printing came in Battles of Legend Heroes Revenge, which came out back in 2019. Now, this is the card's only holo printing, and Squamada is something that these Shadal Dracotail variants are going to run 2 to 3 copies of, so Ultra Squamada has actually gone from being a bulk holo for the last half a decade to now moving at $7 to $8 per copy. Absolutely insane, but the card is pretty old now, and players will do what they can to bling out their new decks, and historically Shadals are one of the more popular archetypes in the game's history. If you're an older player, this is definitely something that you'll want to dig up out of your holo bulk and try to offload for some value while it is seeing some pretty interesting hype. Okay, so one last card that's related to Dracotail, it's Branded Fusion. Now, the Branded Dracotail deck is another variant that seems to be incredibly popular. It might actually be the strongest and most consistent of the different Dracotail variants. Branded Fusion lets you summon one of the Fallen Navaldaz fusion monsters by sending the materials from your hand, field, or deck, so this card is historically just a giant target for Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. It's interesting because Branded Fusion is actually still limited to 1, but it feels like it's the heart of the branded strategy a lot of the time. I think for the most part, we're seeing 60 card Dracotail branded variants, but you can search for Branded Fusion with cards like Aluber and Branded Opening. We also need to keep in mind that there is actually a branded structure deck that we're going to be getting in the fall. We don't know too much about the contents of the structure deck or what it'll bring to the game, but players are hoping that it could make the pure branded deck relevant once again. Now, with Branded Fusion, this card does have some accessible printings. It was originally a super rare in a starter deck, and then it got a secret rare reprint in Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge as well, and that copy is currently only $1 each. However, with the quarter century secret rare printing, that has shot way up. These were around $70 to $80 before. They are now all the way up at over $160 per copy. And then with the ultimate rares, at one point these had tanked down to like $15, $17 each. They're now back up to the $30 mark. I think that the player base is also probably hopeful that this card will get released on the next list and go to either 2 or 3. I'm not too sure how likely that is, since I don't know how much more Konami will be able to use the branded line to push additional product. For now, I think you guys should just hold on to a set of the lower rarity printings if you want to have a set for yourself to play with, because the higher rarity printings, while they could go up even further, they're definitely a pretty big gamble if you were to try to buy into them now. Here's an interesting one. We have World Gears of Theological Demiurgy. So this is a pretty odd extra deck monster that hasn't really seen much play historically. It's a Link 3, but it requires 3 level 5 or higher monsters to make, sort of an awkward condition for a lot of strategies. However, the card is completely unaffected by other monster effects, and if you used monsters that had all different types and attributes to make it, you can destroy all other cards on the field as well. So back a few months ago, this card was seeing some really situational usage in Regenesis, since they're all different attributes and types. It's just that the deck was never really very good, so the card never saw much movement in terms of price. However, the card is now being looked at as a tech option for the Vanquish Soul Canine strategy. For the most part, all of the Vanquish Soul and Canine cards have unique types, so you just have to make sure that you have the appropriate attributes on the field, and going into this card should be pretty easy. Of course, blowing up all other cards on the field and not being affected by monster effects means that your opponent has to have something like Impermanence or Droplet or something like that in order to stop this effect from resolving, but hopefully this can set up an OTK for you right away. Anyways, this card hasn't seen any sort of crazy movement, but it is still pretty early into the hype. World Gears was originally an ultra rare from Dark Neostorm, which doesn't feel that old, but it actually came out back in 2019. That's like 6 years ago. Those ultras are the card's only holo printing, so they're going to cost you about $3 each. Fortunately, the card randomly got reprinted in crossover breakers, I think because Konami thought that maybe Ryuga could make use of the card, but that's a cheap budget option if this is something that you're considering trying out in your extra deck. Up next, this is just one to touch on quickly, it's number 104 Masquerade. So this year, number 104 has actually been a pretty in-demand card. At first, this was important because you could reveal it with 7th Tachyon to search for either Ice or X Ryziel. You barely ever summoned it. I guess technically you could use it against something like Tenpai to negate an effect during the battle phase. At the time, this was a pricey card too, because it only had a rare printing from back in Judgment of the Light. However, this card did get a super rare reprint in OTS Tournament Pack 27, and for a while, either version of the card had gone back down to being under only $1 or so. Now, both versions of the card are in demand once again. In Vanquished Soul Canine, this is part of a pretty common extra deck package where you can attach 104 to Nash Knight, then go into C104, and now you have turned on C104's crazy effect negation. Because this is seeing more competitive usage once again, players are looking at picking up copies of 104. It's strange because that reprint is so recent, but we're also seeing the supers jumping up to around $3 each, and even those old rare copies that aren't holo, they're moving at $3 per copy as well. Definitely a bit strange for something that was reprinted so recently, but at the same time, it's not like you can just go to your local store and buy OTS tournament packs, right? There's a limited number of them that get distributed theoretically, so you still have to try and pull one or get one from your friends. If you've entered your locals in the past few months, double check to see if you have any extras of this card lying around, since it should be something that a lot of players running the Nash Knight package are going to be looking for. And finally, the last card I want to look at for today is Metalronis. So this is a card that was super popular a couple of formats ago. This was an amazing out to Ryziel detonator, which was one of the defining cards in the format. Basically, you target an opponent's monster and you special summon a monster from your hand, deck, or extra deck that has two things that match with the opponent's monster and negate the opponent's monster's effect. However, there's two things that make this card really broken. One is that if you summon the same monster, you have the option to banish both copies face down, and two, your opponent can't activate the targeted monster's effect in response to this card. With Ryziel Detonator going to 1 and other decks in the format just being a little bit more versatile, Metalronis had sort of fallen off. However, it seems that the card is emerging as a really strong tech option in the current format because of Vanquished Soul Canine. Metalronis is a quick play spell, which means that you can use it from the hand or set it as a disruption. So in the Vanquished Soul Canine mirror match, you can use this card to stop an Azuna or Holisu that your opponent summons during your turn and bring out a copy of your own. Now this can be a little bit risky because your opponent could chain a Vanquished Soul effect to bounce the Holisu back to their hand. However, the potential payoff is really big because you could stop your opponent's plays from going through, as well as turning on your own cards, because you could bounce your Holisu, or you could use an Azuna that you bring out as a material for a rank 5 Xyz play. Now with this one, I don't know how good it is. It's still extremely early on in the format, so I don't know how much competitive success this card as a tech option is going to see. Fortunately, Metalronis did receive a reprint in Rarity Collection 4, so most of the rarities of the card are under $1 each. However, the QCR printing has jumped up quite a bit, as it was under the $10 mark, but we're now seeing them come in at about $15 per copy. With these, I could definitely see the QCRs going up even higher if the card starts to see more competitive success. Maybe if players end up topping at YCS Vancouver with this in their builds. Even if you don't want to spend the money on QCRs, you should at least own a set of this card in whatever rarity you want to play with for the upcoming format. Alright guys, that is all I have for today's episode. Definitely excited for YCS Vancouver. It's going to be really cool because it's my home city, so I'm going to be a little bit closer and I don't have to travel as much to attend this event. But YCS Vancouver is also going to be a really pivotal event because it's finally going to be our first really huge event where we can see the new cards from Justice Hunters in action. So it'll finally kind of tell us like what's the optimal Canine Vanquished Soul build. Is it really strong? Is Yami actually going to be better because it's more consistent? Who knows? I'm really excited to find out. Anyways, guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch episode, make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.